All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker tonight, Mr. Jeff Maynard. And Jeff's subject is tonight the lost records of Hubert Wilkins, and records were in the States. And on his passing, they managed to get those split up and went to various places. And Jeff has been instrumental in corralling them. It's probably the best word I can use.
Corralling's a good word.
Corralling.
Yeah, I like corralling.
He didn't use a rope though. And to try and bring those back both to Australia and to gather them together rather than being here, there, everywhere. Without further ado, our guest speaker tonight is Mr. Jeff Maynard. Jeff.
Now, I'm told this is on, so this is working and everyone's good. Okay. And I will just give David a nod whenever I want him to do something like that. And we'll see if it works. I always like to get a bit of a level of an audience when I start. And I sort of said to Derek beforehand, you know, how bright are these guys? And he said, oh, you know, some of them aren't too bad, you know. So I thought I'd kick off with a quiz. So I'm going to give you a bit of a quiz if we can go to the first. And I'm going to just down, should do it. There it is. I'll show you the signatures of famous people and you tell me who they are. So that's the first one down the bottom. Anybody can guess that one? Of course, Churchill. Yes. And next one, please, David. And we'll find that down the bottom of a mention in dispatches from World War I. And you see by the mention in dispatches that Lieutenant temporary captain, I think that is, G.H. Wilkins, MC, General List, blah, blah, did something to impress Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, got a mention in dispatches. And that was it, signed by Winston Churchill. And again, yes. Two signatures there. They actually look a bit suspiciously the same. So I'm wondering if Walt signed on behalf of Mickey. I'm not sure. Yep. We find that on a cartoon 10 years after the war, when the same Wilkins, he's now Sir Hubert rather than George or GH. He's now on his way to the North Pole in a submarine. And he was mates with Walt Disney. Disney drew a cartoon of Mickey in a submarine heading off to the Arctic and presented it to him and said what it says there, best wishes on all your adventures, etc. Give you a third one. Pretty simple.
Yeah. King George.
Yeah, George. Good. You got to get the number now. Fifth. Yes, that's right. Fifth. And if we go one, we'll find that. Please. We find that on a proclamation. It's written up the top by George. I mean, lovely language, but I'll bit of the second paragraph. Whereas our trusty and well-beloved Sir Hubert Wilkins, Knight Bachelor, is presently to conduct an expedition to that portion of the Antarctic regions, blah, blah, Falklands, and we judge him to be expedient person to take possession of it for us. I'll give you one more.
Go and get us an item.
Well, I like down the bottom. Now know ye that we, reposing a special trust and confidence in the discretion and faithfulness of our trusty and well-beloved Sir Hubert Wilkins, Knight Bachelor, aforesaid, etc., etc. If you want to know how far we've come as a civilization in the last 100 years, you compare the language of that with a Donald Trump tweet. Now, that's just the preamble. Now, there's a few here, but you should get a couple of them. Aviators.
Charles Lindbergh.
One. Rickenbacker down the bottom, and the others I don't know. Shirley Short, I found out. He died in about 1930 or 31, according to Wikipedia and all those things. Eddie Rickenbacker, he was the World War I American ace.
Yeah, but he's also...
he did a few other things.
By that time, he was running Eastern Airlines.
Yeah, I think he got involved. And we find that one on this certificate, which is presented to George Hubert Wilkins. There was a short-lived League of Aviators in America, set up by the fellow who set up the Harmon Trophy. His name's there, Clifford Harmon. And they'd issue these to people who did something. Haven't found very many of them. Down one. I found one that was the same as that, just on the internet, and had been awarded to someone who died in the First World War. And then they changed the design of them. And Smithy got one, and it's a different design. It's still the Diplome d'Honneur from the League of Aviators, but Smithy got his in 1934, and it's in the National Library in Canberra.
The other interesting thing there, it implies there was an Australian section of this.
Isn't that interesting too? Yeah, champion aviator of the Australian section, whatever that means. The only other person I found one of this design was the actor, Leonardo DiCaprio. He got one for appearing in the movie The Aviator as Howard Hughes. And you can see him in the scene there where he's about to break up with Kate Blanchett, but he's got one in the background in his office.
Oh,
So-
that's Howard Hughes then.
Yes, Howard Hughes got one. That was, so, yeah, look. No, look, if you're expecting the humour to get any better in the next half hour, I can promise you'll be disappointed. Yeah. Okay. So basically, if you go to your grave with things signed by Mickey Mouse and Winston Churchill and all these people, it's pretty fair to say you've had an interesting life. And this is the person I'm going to talk about, George Hubert Wilkins. He was born in South Australia in 1888. Left home, went to Adelaide to study, left home, went to Sydney, learned to use a cinematograph, take the movies, lived in Sydney for a few years, learning how to make made early Australian movies. And then he moved in 1912, he moved to London. And there he is with his camera. He's strapped it to a plane or put it on the whatever, and he's trying to get aerial footage. And that'd have been 1912, I'd say. And he got interested from there. In 1913, he went off to the Arctic, took the same camera, went up to the Arctic with a Canadian expedition. The ship sank. He wandered around the ice for 3 years, learnt to live and learnt to live off the ice, lived with the Inuit, did all that sort of thing. In 1916, he found his way to the north coast of Alaska, and someone that said there's this thing going on called the war, the Great War. And he said, all right, I better go back to Australia and enlist. So he did. He came back to Australia. He actually he visited his mother. His father had died. He visited his mother in South Australia, went down to Point Cook, joined the Flying Corps, went off to went to England, and then they sent him across. And when he got to France, they said, there's this fella called Charles Bean here who wants a photographic record of the war. You know how to use a camera. You're not in the Flying Corps, you're a photographer. And your mate, Frank Hurley, is here as well. So the two of you are going to work together. So Hurley and Wilkins jumped on the boat together, went across to France, met Charles Bean, and Hurley was there for about 10 or 11 weeks and went to Palestine. Wilkins stayed there to the end of the war. So he took a lot of photographs, and he was interested in he was always interested in aircraft. Whenever he could, he'd go up in an aircraft. He was a pilot, he'd photograph them. And so he took a lot of photographs that we have. In fact, at the War Memorial, our collection of photographs from the Western Front, there's over 4,000 of them. And Wilkins was largely responsible. One of the other things about the photographs he took during the First World War, which has never really been exploited, is the fact that they were all shot on large format cameras, big glass or either half plate or full plate cameras. That was at Bean's insistence. And so you have these big glass negatives that the War Memorial has scanned very high resolution and then whacked another bit of glass on top to preserve the silver nitrate. So you can take a lot of photographs, and as I said, it's never been exploited, and blow them up and get a lot of detail that's never really been seen. And where they look fantastic, they look okay here. But if you get your modern ultra high definition TV, 70-inch TV, and put these photographs on and blow them up, you can almost see each little piece of silver nitrate in the thing. It's quite amazing. And as I said, it's never been kind of done on the big screen. What else we got? He became good friends with Monash, took this photograph of Monash and all his boys. End of the war, after the armistice, he, sorry, that's all right. Oh no, sorry, I forgot this one. He actually had a unique war record. This is the attack on Mont St. Quentin, where Monash walked the boys up the river and crossed at the north and came back overnight and attacked the attacked the Germans from the rear, but Wilkins actually often ran with them, carried his camera. He got 2 combat decorations, one for dragging wounded back from no man's land, and the second one, he got a bar to it, the Military Cross. He got that for, keep talking? Okay. He got the bar for the Military Cross for leading soldiers into battle when the officers had been shot, and he refused to carry a gun. He only ever carried his camera, which is quite remarkable. After the armistice, he went up to, yes, please. He went up and photographed the HMAS Australia and did a beautiful series of photographs of the ship. It was up in Scotland at the time. And I threw this one in here because it had an aeroplane in it. So that was an aeroplane trying to take off on the deck of the HMAS Australia. After that, he went back to Gallipoli with, there's his Military Cross with a bar. As I said, only Australian photographer from any conflict, any war, to receive a combat decoration.
Where does that live now?
America.
Oh.
Most of it.
So is that in a private collection or?
No, there's actually 2, but I'll get to that in a minute. There's 2, they're identical, both Military Crosses, both with a bar. Why he's got 2, no one knows. The war memorial's been across and trying to look at it and doing all that, but no, it's in Ohio and it's staying in Ohio. Yeah, sorry. And then at the end of that, Charles Bean went back to Gallipoli on the Gallipoli mission to photograph all the battlefields and so on. And Wilkins in the back there with his pipe, Bean just in front of him. George Lambert, the Australian artist, having a bit of a snooze. So he photographed all the battlefields of Gallipoli then. Now, I want you to look at the jacket or the coat. Nice. But I'll have a question for you in a minute. Big fur collar, all that sort of stuff. After he got back from Gallipoli, he spent about 3 or 4 months helping catalogue all the official Australian photographs at the end of the war. Then he flew in the England-Australia air race. He competed in that. Yes, please. Had a Blackburn Kangaroo, him and 3 others. They had a lot of trouble. Of course, the Smith brothers wanted to. They had a lot of trouble. They got this thing off from Crete. They were heading for Cairo. An oil line to one of the engines broke. So engine seized up. They turned around and they got it back to Crete and they crash landed into a ditch and the thing was over. After that, I'll have to have a look and see what he did next. Oh, he went with Shackleton. Shackleton, well, he went to Antarctica, but didn't stay. And then on 1921, Shackleton was going back to Antarctica in the Quest. Wilkins went with him as a official photographer. The Quest kept breaking down. So Wilkins went on ahead and photographed the whaling stations at South Georgia, took an amazing series of photos of those 2. He photographed everything. It's just thousands of photographs. And Shackleton died and Wilkins, initially they erected a memorial for Shackleton and sent his body back to the widow. I think the body got as far as South America somewhere and the widow said, no, I don't want it, send it back to South Georgia. So it's buried there now. So, and you see Wilkins, that's Wilkins at the back next to the Cairn thing they've built. What did he do after that? Let's have a look. Oh, okay. He actually came back to Australia and spent a couple of years living Indigenous up in the Northern Territory, Queensland, around the islands. And then in 1925, he tried to mount an expedition to Antarctica with aeroplanes, couldn't raise the sponsorship, went to America. End of 1925, and yes, please. He got 2 aeroplanes. He got sponsored by the Detroit Arctic Society, who were trying to promote aeroplanes and car manufacturers to make planes. He got 2 aeroplanes. He got a Fokker single engine, which is this one. And he got a Fokker tri-motor, which is this one. This is at Fairbanks. It's been assembled. They put the wing on it. They haven't stuck the propellers on it yet. And then, so he had 2 airplanes to explore the Arctic. Didn't have a lot of luck, particularly didn't have a lot of luck with this one. And So this was just after, I think, the first flight or the second flight. So he did what every Aussie would do. He patched it up, he stuck it on eBay, and he and he flogged it off to this bloke called Charles Kingsford Smith.
Charles said, I want the jacket to go with it.
Well, no, see, that's my question. Look at that jacket
That's what I
too.
was gonna say.
Which one's better, the fur collar or the no fur collar? Smithy's or Wilkins jacket? But
Detachable.
could have been. He could have thrown the jacket in. This was actually 1934, I think, in New Zealand. But of course, Smithy renamed that aeroplane the Southern Cross and became quite well known. Yeah, but anyway, yes, please. He went back to the Arctic in 1927, had some stints and biplanes this time. Didn't have a lot more luck. He landed one on the ice. He was trying to get to the North Pole and fly across the Arctic. Landed one on the ice and walked back with his pilot, Ben Olsen. They walked back about 100 miles across the ice. And so he lost one of the Stinsons. And then he got a lightweight Lockheed Vega, single engine plane, beautiful plane, very sleek. And so in 1928, he actually flew from the top of Alaska across to Spitsbergen and became the first man to fly an aeroplane across the top of the world.
And he was a pilot, but he was doing the flying.
No, Ben Olsen, the American pilot, was his partner and all that. He was doing the pilot. He was doing the flying. Wilkins could fly, but Wilkins navigated it. The two of them flew in this thing. And for that, he basically got knighted and became quite famous. And there he is. They've landed the thing at a little remote area of Spitsbergen. He's written something on that to give the photo to somebody. And he also then made one of his poorer life choices. He married this lady who was Suzanne Bennett. She was an Australian actress who was working in New York at the time. And she came from Walhalla in Victoria and was a singer and actress and gone across to work in New York. And he married her in 1929. After the same year, 1928, he took his aeroplane down to Antarctica and became the first person, him and Ben Olsen again, became the first pair to fly in Antarctica, down the peninsula part of the thing. And he took an amazing series of photos there. Oh no, here he is in Antarctica. Here's the Lockheed. He had two Lockheed Vegas. He got a second one as a backup though this time. And he took an amazing series of aerial photographs of Antarctica in 1928, again, which haven't really been sort of seen or looked at fully. And please, and he's hand coloured these. What do you do after that? Oh, that's right. He went around the world. The Graf Zeppelin went around the world in 1929, and he was invited along. Here it is in Japan, obviously, because it went where it goes across Europe, landed Japan, took off from New York, Germany, Japan, across the Pacific to the West Coast and across back to I think. So again, here he is with a Japanese family on his visit to Japan, and one of his shots from the Zeppelin. And this is the yes, please. This is the Zeppelin. This is Lakehurst in New Jersey, I think it is, but that's the aircraft hangar. Oh, sorry, the Zeppelin hangar on the right, obviously the Zeppelin. And that's where 6 or 7 years later, the Hindenburg didn't quite land the same there. Then he started his boldest adventure. This was 1930-31. He decided to, if you can't fly over or land at the North Pole, there's no land there, you'll go under the ice in a submarine. So he got a World War I submarine, converted it. They built that sort of superstructure. The conning tower is collapsible. The idea being that if they had to, they'd slide under the ice. They went up to the Arctic and they sent radio broadcasts and all this sort of thing. And he managed to push the thing under the ice, but it was pretty much disabled by the time he got there. But he did manage to push it under, and out of one of the little portholes, he actually took the first photographs under the Arctic ice. looking out the window. And this is 1931. So he's sort of always had his camera with him. After that, the submarine thing left him broke. And he was in debt to this American, Lincoln Ellsworth, who was quite wealthy. Ellsworth wanted to fly across Antarctica. It was the only thing left to do that hadn't been sort of done in a lot of ways. So Wilkins helped him. Ellsworth was a fan of Wyatt Earp. That was his hero, and he had a lot of money. So what he did was he collected Wyatt Earp's things. This is one of the things he collected, which is Wyatt Earp's cartridge belt. Wyatt Earp didn't die till like 1929 or something, I think, and Josephine by that time was selling whatever she could. So Ellsworth went along and bought a heap of stuff. So Ellsworth bought this Wyatt Earp's cartridge belt so he could carry it across Antarctica, which he eventually did, as you do. Wilkins got this, which was a Northrop Gamma, I think, specially built with two-seater, so you could have a pilot at the front. Ellsworth could sit in the back, and that way they could fly across Antarctica. They had a few false starts and things like that, but eventually they took off from Dundee Island near the point of the Antarctic Peninsula and flew across to the Ross Sea. And Ellsworth took quite some remarkable photographs of flying across. When they were actually, Wilkins dropped them off in the Wyatt Earp and took off back to South America. So when Ellsworth and his pilot, a British pilot called Hollick Kenyon, were flying across, they were the only two men on the entire continent. And they were landing and refuel, trying to get going again and everything like that. So they're completely alone on the continent at that time. That was 1935. 37, some Russians were flying across the Arctic and disappeared. So they asked Wilkins, because of his experience in the Arctic, to mount a search for them, which he did. They never found them. They had this and they had something else, but they had the flying boat. They searched for 6 months, never found the Russians. Sorry?
Is that the PBY called Goober?
I'm not sure what it's called.
Goober 1,
Goober 1, is it?
not Goober 2.
And at the end, he didn't find them. But at the end of it, he went to Moscow to be personally thanked by Stalin, who tad egotistical, I think, Stalin. As a gift, Stalin wrote something on a photograph of himself and gave it to Wilkins to give to his wife.
Well, he's done well. Churchill, Stalin,
Yeah.
Mouse.
So Stalin scrawls. Stalin wrote in crayon, and you can't make out what it is.
Yeah.
And I've had Russian people say, "No, don't know," but it's something about British or something. But he gave him this photograph and said, "Give that to your wife. It's a picture of me." Okay. After that, he went back to Antarctica a couple of times. Throughout World War II, he worked for the Americans. He toured, he'd give speeches, and he basically settled in America with his wife in Pennsylvania. And here he is at the farmhouse in a place called Montrose, Pennsylvania. This would be about a few months before he died. At his farmhouse, if you look closer, you see he's working on his typewriter. And he died in 1958. His ashes, or his body, was cremated. The American Navy took his ashes to the North Pole, surfaced at the North Pole, and scattered his ashes. So and it was the first submarine to actually surface at the North Pole. So you can win a trivia question by saying the first submarine to surface at the North Pole flew what flag? And you say, well, the American flag, but it also flew the Australian flag as well.
What age was he?
70 when he died. Yeah, heart attack. No, it was the skate that took him to the North Pole. The Nautilus was the first to get there, but it didn't actually surface through the ice. There's a shot of him. His last trip to Antarctica was about 6 months before he died. And that's about, I think, early 1958, this would be. He went back and died. The beaut thing about Wilkins is he was a hoarder. I used to think he collected things to a sign of his no, significance, historical significance. I'll keep records and things like that. He kept everything. He kept what you consider historically significant, and he kept rubbish. But he just kept everything. This is a business card from when he went to the Balkans War in 1913 to cover it from the Turkish side. And yes, please. It's a postcard from a young lady. She sent him, he's a ladies' man. She sent him this postcard, and on the back, this is 1913. He's been in England 6 or 12 months. Dear Wilkie, Marion was so disappointed not to see you the other evening. Can you come over next Saturday or Sunday? Love, Margot, in the corner, or Friday evening. I think he had a few romantic interests. G. Wilkins, Esquire. So, but he kept all this stuff. Here's a reference for working. He started as a trade, as an electrical engineer in Adelaide, 1908. He's kept that. He's kept it all. When you flew around the world on the Graf Zeppelin, you would have got a little menu. You kept menus. So that you can see on the first day luncheon, you're going to get boneless squab pigeon and things like that. Luggage tags off the Zeppelin, off the Hindenburg, off everything. He kept it all. Notes, money. This is from a trip to Russia.
So where is a lot of this?
I'll get to that. Yeah. This was a little matchbox, a tin matchbook case. When his submarine was halfway to the Arctic, it stopped in England to get repaired, and the Prince of Wales, Edward, the one that abdicated, gave him a little match case. He's obviously carried it because it was all beaten up, and there was a book of matches inside of it, things like that. He's kept this stuff. And all the stuff went to his wife. He died in 1958, and he left it all to Suzanne, who was living in the farmhouse where you saw it in Pennsylvania. She'd been having an affair with a gentleman called Winston Ross, who can't afford a shirt, on the left there. And the two of them, she died and she left it all to him. She died in 72. He got it all. And on the back of this picture, this is Winston Ross's handwriting. And I think he liked to drink. He said, "What a wasted life it seems in 1979. 25 years later, does it matter? Does anything? I'm deluged with duty. Should I bother? All rooms uphill and down dale are filled." And he's gone up the side. Does posterity care? And then across the top in green, he's written, "Junk sells at all yards and we have historical junk." What Winston Ross did, he had a building about the size, bigger than this room, larger than this. And it was just full of boxes, all the stuff. And the roof leaked. And so it was wet. And so boxes were dripping on things and things like that. One fellow went there in 1981, said, "I walked through and I was horrified. There were pools of water. And I stepped on a piece of paper and I picked it up. It was a letter from Shackleton, and he's sort of saying, and so it got, but what Winston Ross did after Suzanne died was start to say, well, I need to make some money. So Wilkins had a lovely 1939 Chevrolet Woody, which he bought new. Dick Smith went there in about 84, I think. Dick's interested in Sir Hubert, went across to the farmhouse, met Winston Ross and his new wife, and Dick brought the car back to Australia and had it completely restored. Runs beautifully, like new. You can see 1939, Pennsylvania. It's on Dick's property outside of Canberra. But Winston Ross was saying, well, who wants this stuff? And he got involved with a couple of collectors, because Wilkins had collected not only that, but covers are a big thing. Covers are basically envelopes with a stamp on them. And when you get the first flight here or there, if you've got a first day cover with a stamp that's been cancelled at Antarctica or the North Pole, the collectors go nuts. And Wilkins had thousands of them. because he used to carry them on his trips and sell them to sponsor the submarine, to sponsor his flights. There were thousands of these covers. Winston Ross got involved with a couple of fellas and then argued with them. And then they got into this huge court case as to who owned what. This was at 1985. And I won't go through too much detail here, but as a result of the court case, they had to go through everything and list, and it's just document this thick of all the stuff that they went through and who owned what. And so I got copies of that, and it's just so many things. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, and as a result of that court case, the parties who were arguing with each other, Winston Ross agreed to sell his material to the Ohio State University, which had the Byrd Polar Archive. Byrd was their flyer. They had the archive there. So the Ohio State University stepped in 1985, signed a contract. They sent trucks up to Pennsylvania and they loaded it all on board. They had the archive, or the librarian at the time, it was the librarian from the Ohio OSU. He drove up there with a few interns or students or something like that. And they put it all in big plastic bags and they carried it. And they took it back and they took it out and they started drying it and trying to sort it all out. A lot of the clothing, there was sort of, might have been the leather jacket. It was all mildew. They just had to burn it. They said there was insects and all sorts of stuff. But what they could say, they actually catalogued and put into the, this is the Wilkins collection at the, or part of it at the Ohio State University. And it's all catalogued and I think there's, I don't know how many boxes, but it's just huge. But that wasn't it. All the stuff that Winston Ross had sold, boxes of it, was still out there.
And you said that he sold his half of the disputed collection.
He sold his half of the disputed collection to Ohio. The Dave Larson and Dave Larson and Paul Rodzianko, the two collectors he got in disputes with, they kept theirs.
Yeah. So you got half of it.
They got half of it. Yeah.
And then whatever he'd already disposed of prior.
Well, it gets more complicated than that, because when he sold it to the Ohio State University, he did so begrudgingly. So he didn't sell it all. So when they turned up with their trucks and their students and their plastic bags, he said, there it is. But he kept a lot of it. So there was Ohio, Winston Ross still, two collectors, plus other stuff he'd sold out to different people. I heard about it, that's me, late 90s, and went to this is Wilkins homestead as it was then in South Australia, and started going around trying to figure all this out. I first went to Ohio State University, and that's his military cross there. See down there, there's his knighthood medal. That stuff went to the Ohio State University. So I just started going around and figuring out that it ain't all there.
You said there are two identical crosses.
Yeah, there's two of those and we don't know why.
But are they both in this collection? Or
yes, they're both in that collection, two of them side by side.
Oh.
Yep. And the War Memorial's been across, looked at it and said, well, we don't know why he got two, but he collected him. Someone might have dropped dead and you grabbed theirs as well. You just, you don't know with Wilkins. Winston Ross, the man who was selling it, also had a couple of sons by, stepsons actually. This is one of them, Mike Ross, and I contacted him. He lived in Michigan, he's dead now, and he said, oh yeah, after Winston had sold it, there was a lot more stuff in the farmhouse. Basically, Mike went back to his car up to the farmhouse and loaded it up with boxes of stuff and took it back to his place in Michigan. This is 2014. I went and visited him and he said, yeah, okay. So he took me out to an Amish barn because he lived among all these Amish people. He wasn't Amish, but he funny story, but he got to know them. He left it in the neighbour's barn. He took me out there and we loaded up. He had a pickup truck the size of a backyard swimming pool. We loaded it all in the back of that. We went back to his shed, which you saw a minute ago. He was a gun maker. He had all these lathes and things. He used to make guns. And we took it back there. And so he had boxes of Wilkins stuff as well. So I spent a week in Michigan kind of going through all this stuff and sorting it out and seeing what was there, because he hadn't looked inside it. And when you open up a box, as I did, this is what you found inside. And there's boxes and boxes of it. Photographic plates, the belt buckles, I figured he's pinched off a German in World War One. Passports, notebooks, obviously, I said photographic plates, books. It was just, imagine a room full of boxes like this. Some of the stuff I found in this, the Michigan stuff, autobiographies, and they were in poor condition, a lot of this stuff. Yes, please. The paper had been deteriorating. Yep, thanks. It's more just everything. There was no order to any of it, which made it. And there was good stuff with rubbish. You know, there's books, there's Christmas cards from people you never heard of and things like that. It was just all together. One of the interesting things that ended up at Ohio was World War One. There's no real record at the War Memorial of who took which photographs, because it was never logged. And Charles Bean didn't really like people being assigned photographs. It was just official Australian official photographer, I think it was. But when the photographers such as Wilkins was head of the photographic department, when he took stuff to the censor to be censored, he'd get a copy of the list of photographs he supplied. So you can see down the bottom, E1405, EA, the date, 31st of the 10th, 17, IPS, 15 field company engineers doing something. And that's the copies of the things. Very hard to see, but across the top of that you'll see in blue pen, like a Chinograph copy for official Australian photographer. Wilkins has got his copy from the censor back in 1917, 1999. He's kept it. Of course, it's ended up in America. Still there now, which is kind of interesting, please. One of the interesting things I found, and this was in the Amish barn, was going through the boxes and there's books, and I picked up a book and I thought, oh, good, official. This is volume 12 of the official history, which I think I saw some down here. Yeah. Volume 12 is the photographic volumes. It's got all the photographs in it. As I said, the Australian War Memorial, except unless Frank Hurley said that's my photograph, no one's ever been able to assign who took what photograph. And I picked this up. I was in that Mike Ross's workshop there where he made his guns. I sit there and I opened it up and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be good if Charles Bean's written something like, you know, to George from Charlie Bean, you know, blah, blah. This volume was actually published, I think, in 1922 or 23, because the volumes were staggered as they were published. But no, nothing, you know, and I put it down. A couple of days later, I picked it up again, thought, oh, bugger, Charles Bean should have signed it. But I went through it and, yes, please. And I looked under one of the photographs and I saw, bottom right-hand corner, I saw something in pencil. If you look down there, it says GHW. And again, and what he'd done, what Wilkins had done, he'd gone through his volume and he'd initialed the photographs that he had taken. So it's the only record we have of, well, except for what Frank Hurley said, it's the only record we have where we can say, you know, this photograph should be attributed to Wilkins. Another thing he said, original spec sheet for the Fokker Trimotor, which of course became the Southern Cross. And Wilkins, in his handwriting, I think he's probably sent this to his mother. Across the bottom, he says, this is the type of airplane that I will have, but mine will be a bit larger than this one. Wilkins had, the Southern Cross had a slightly wider wing than the previous Trimotors. So he's kept the spec sheet from that, which was beautiful. Yes, please. That's what a boarding pass looks like when you get aboard the Hindenburg airship. Yeah, he was on the maiden voyage of the Hindenburg. when it got across successfully.
Of course he was.
Yes, of course.
He wasn't on the last one.
Of course he was. He wasn't on the last one. No. So he, he's kept his boarding pass from the.
So where did Mike Ross's collection, if you're able to tell now, or you're holding it back?
Oh no! Oh, sorry. No, Mike Ross's collection. The majority of it went to the Ohio State University.
It's been consolidated.
It's been consolidated. They've collected it all. There were some things that came back here that I kind of insisted on, which was the World War I stuff. The book with the initials in it.
Yeah, well, that was one I was wondering.
Yeah, that that sort of stuff. I said, that's got to go in the war memorial.
And that's not really their flight history that they're focusing on.
That was one of the funny things, because when I spent about a month at Ohio going through their stuff, and I'm finding bits of film, and because there's boxes and canisters of film, because he filmed everything as well, and it's all a lot of crap. But there was this bits of literally cut off strips of 35 mil film, and I was in there one day and I'm doing this and I'm going, bloody hell, this is film of the Southern Cross, And the archivist there said, oh, what's the Southern Cross? And I said, Kingsford Smith's plane. And of course they said, who's Kingsford Smith?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, this is the first flight of the Southern Cross up in the Arctic. We've got to copy this. So yeah, that happens quite a bit. Yeah, sorry. I'm getting to the end. I've written 3 books about the guy so far. The first concentrates on his flights in the Arctic. The second is Unseen Anzac, is his work in World War I. And the third is really about the flights of Lincoln Ellsworth and how they first crossed the flew across Antarctica.
So did you say that Wilkins was the pilot for Ellsworth, or?
No, Hubert Kenyon was the pilot for Ellsworth. Wilkins organised it, designed the plane, bought the ship. Ellsworth turned up, come aboard, stuck him in the passenger seat of the plane, flew him across. Wilkins ran around, picked him up.
My understanding when you first said
Yeah.
he wasn't the pilot.
Yeah, no, he wasn't the pilot.
But he organised.
Yeah, we've never actually found, and people have looked anywhere where we can say he had a pilot's license. We don't know.
So the other thing was that aircraft still survived. So where is that located? Or in the photo?
Yeah. I'm sorry, the Smithsonian, Washington.
Oh.
Yeah. Ellsworth, beautiful looking plane. Ellsworth donated it to the Smithsonian, and I went there, and they've got the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, Washington, and I went there and photographed that. They got Amelia Earhart's Vega and all these sorts of planes, a heap of fantastic planes. Done those 3 books. More recently, a couple of people and myself got together because we wanted to do a sort of tribute to him. So we all got together and we produced this book, where we put all these photographs and things together to produce some sort of limited edition book on as a tribute. Introduction by Dick Smith. Dick Smith's always supported my work, and what do you need and where you're going and those sorts of things. There are still 2 or 3, 2 that I've seen but haven't got collections of boxes that are still, one sitting in a private garage in Arizona, one's up in Seattle, and there's a guy over in oh God, I can't think of the name. He's a Russian. He's got a heap of stuff too. And we're still trying to get those and get them back to Australia. What I did do is bring along a couple of things over there you want to have a look at, if you choose to. The big certificate that's been signed by Lindbergh and Brickenbacker. There's the picture that Jumpin' Joe Stalin gave him to give to Suzanne. What else? I think I got a flag off the Nautilus. He carried these little American flags on his submarine that he'd give out to people as souvenirs. 48 stars, because Alaska and Hawaii weren't states. And I think there's his pass from World War I or something like that. I'm steadily working to get things back to Australia. I wanted to get the spec sheet for the Southern Cross. It disappeared.
On the one that.
Yeah. The original spec sheet for the Southern Cross. I said that should go back to somewhere in Australia.
So
you know.
where was that last time we saw it?
That was in another fellow I haven't mentioned called Dave Larson. He was in Washington. He had boxes of letters and collections. He was one of the people that was in the disputes. He had that. He lived alone. He died. They didn't find his body for a week, and then the son came in and cleaned up. And it's a lot of the stuff went to Ohio. I'd had an agreement that, like, you know, these things would come to Australia. It didn't happen. We don't know what's happened to it.
So it may survive and be.
It may survive in a private collection. It may have been thrown in the rubbish. Don't know. If it turns up, you know.
At least you've got a photo.
Well, at least got a photo of it, that kind of thing. That's me. I'll take credit. Oh, sorry, I brought some books along. Oh, here they are. Look, it's a limited edition that, like I said, a few of us, including Dick and a few of us, sort of put it together and said we want to do this as a bit of a tribute to him. So there's a book on the guy, and we put it with a couple of sort of replica of his posters and things, and a book on collected writings. He wrote thousands of letters, and what I've been trying to do is catalogue them all. So at some point we can, collected writings or something like that. But it'd be a book this thick because he just wrote letters all the time, you know. And I've been collecting those as well. So anyway, look, if you want one of these, come up and see me. They're pricey. They're $160 on the website, but because we're not having to send them out and post them, they're $120 tonight with the posters and everything else thrown in. And I've got one of them swipey things in my box over there, if you wish.
David, you missed out on the.
I've probably gone over a bit, have I? Oh, not too bad. Questions?
We have to get the microphone to the question.
Oh, sorry.
No, otherwise the people on Zoom can't hear.
You may have to switch it on.
And we might turn the lights all back on.
I think they're up.
There's two sets. No, There's that's all right. a set down there and a set here, lights.
Switch.
Enjoyed your talk immensely, Jeff. Thank you very much for coming on
I
tonight.
probably rushed
Wonderful.
it a bit, but you can
No,
imagine
no,
I'll go
brilliant.
for 3 hours and still be showing you photos.
My question is, I know he was obviously sponsored by a number of people, maybe even organisations, but I get the impression he was also a wealthy person. Where did he make his fortune?
No, he wasn't wealthy. He got sponsorship,
Yeah.
but he sunk it into the submarine. And at the end of the submarine, he was broke because the submarine didn't work. The submarine was initially sponsored by William Randolph Hearst, who sponsored some of his other things, but it was conditional on the further he got north, the more money he got. If he got under the Arctic ice and got to the North Pole, he was going to get $100,000. If he got up through the ice, which they'd planned to do, and they were going to rendezvous with the Graf Zeppelin airship and exchange passengers and things like that, they would have got another 150 or something like that. As it was, he shoved it under the ice and came back out again, and he was in debt. So that left him broke. He worked for Lincoln Ellsworth for about 4 or 5 years, getting Ellsworth across Antarctica. And he lived on the Wyatt Earp himself. Wilkins did, and in between that, he'd travel around, tour, show his films, and try and collect money. So he never really had a lot of money.
But he obviously had a few fairly ordinary mates.
Oh yeah. Well, he never actually. He bought the house, the farmhouse in Pennsylvania, and his wife lived there, and Winston Ross, her lover, lived there. But he never actually lived there. He just lived in hotel rooms and bunked with people. He constantly traveled. He never actually settled and lived anywhere. He never lived anywhere in his life longer for 3 or 4 weeks, right up to the time he died. You know, he died in a hotel room in Framingham, Pennsylvania.
What was the cause of it?
Heart attack.
Okay.
At 70, yeah. But he just they found him dead on the hotel room floor one morning.
Jeff, fascinating talk. It's always dangerous to ask an author to critique and other authors' works.
Not Peter Fitzsimons.
I was going to say, what's your views of Peter Fitzsimon Inc. and his collection of people that put books together? Just
Look,
wondering
I
your
shouldn't
view of
say.
that. Huh?
Look, I personally am not a fan of that style of writing, you know, but he sells a heck of a lot of books. So who am I going to argue with, you know? And when he did Wilkins, he said to me, you know, thanks. He read the Unseen Anzac and those things, and said, look, you know, you obviously did the work and all that sort of thing.
I suppose the following question is, have you found that his interest in it has sparked any more interest in the work you're doing? Which is one of the, even though his style of writing is such that, you know, not all of us love it, he brings people in who probably normally wouldn't read these sort of books.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. And he does that across history everywhere. So whether you like that style of blokey kind of writing or not, you can't argue with the fact that there's a lot of, when I started, I could stand in the South Australian Museum and say Sir Hubert Wilkins, and the curator there would say, who are you talking about? Nobody knew it, you know.
Helping the sales.
Oh, well, yeah, overall, you know, more people do know about him, you know, but 20 odd years ago, no one, and it's been a gradual improvement. You know, another fellow who's a mate of mine did a biography, Simon Nash, and, you know, more people are actually writing about him. He's not sort of a household name like Kingsford Smith, obviously.
I'm ashamed because I thought he was American.
Oh, there you go. See, yeah, a lot of
I
people.
knew the name,
yeah.
but I knew Dick Smith's interest
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah.
And I always found it puzzling
Yeah.
that Dick was fascinated by an American.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just one and then two. Oh, sorry, down the back.
Okay, Phil.
Oh, sorry, I'll go 1, 2, 3.
Jeff, fascinating talk on a fascinating man. Thank you. Firstly, a bit of information. You might not be aware, but the Harmon Trophy for Australia, which was part of the International League of Aviators, which you've talked about,
Yes.
and in fact, a picture of which appears in the margin of one of those certificates you showed.
Yeah.
The Harmon Trophy for Australia is on display at the Airways Museum at Essendon Airport.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so you can come and have a look at it
I'll come and have a look
sometime.
at it. Yeah.
And the other question I had for you is, you said that the lady that he married was one of the worst decisions of his life.
Yes.
Now, obviously, towards the end of his life and the dispersal of his collection, that was an issue. But were there problems before that? Was it a bad marriage?
He was engaged to another lady at the time. Changed his mind and married Suzanne. In fact, he was going south to Antarctica in 1928, and he wrote to his brother, said, you know, forget all the stuff you're reading in the paper, I'm not marrying her. And then he went back and married her. I don't really know why. Look, it wasn't, she liked the title that came with it because he was already Sir Hubert, so she was Lady Wilkins. I've not really found evidence that it was a happy marriage from the start, you know. But that's that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll go.
There were no children?
No children, no.
Okay. Then my original question was going to be, what got you started on Sir Hubert Wilkins?
I read an obscure reference to him in another book, and it said, you know, the Australian Sir Hubert Wilkins flew here, and I sort of went, no, that's a misprint. You know, I've never heard of him. You know, and thought, you know, and then read something about this Australian trying to get to the North Pole in a submarine. I went, no, you know, must be American or, you know, Austrian. You know, it's obviously messed up. You know, and so I started with that. That was about 25 years ago.
Okay.
And I went across the homestead.
Who? Oh, right.
And then Dick Smith decided to restore the homestead, which he's done, or he bought the land that it's on, and it's been.
You wouldn't believe it, but I realised.
So yeah, I just sort of,
somebody got a talk.
I went to America.
Talk on Herbert Wilkins.
My first time I went to America was 1998, and my wife and myself spent a month at the archive going through. You saw those big shelves of things. We didn't get through it all, you know, and it was pretty clear that there's a lot missing. You know, there's something wrong here. You know, he kept journals. You know, there's no journals. There's bits, the critical stuff is missing. And so I started searching then, you know, and there's still critical stuff missing, you know.
Thanks, Jeff. It's a wonderful presentation you've given, and I, like others, have heard of the name and originally thought, and I heard of him through the Detroit Southern Cross link, and I again thought he was an American explorer who looked after an Australian, you know, hopeful. But this is a boy's own story. This guy is.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. If you go one more, if you click one more slide past the book I've been trying to flog.
You're in the Zoom meeting, so we've got to.
Yeah, look, what I've been told, sorry, I will quickly interrupt. I just realized I had the slide. What I've been told to do, as much as I love social media, is set up a YouTube channel. So if you look up Jeff Maynard, Adventure Historian, there's a Southern Cross Enigma across there as one of the YouTubes. I think it's 14 minutes and 37 seconds long. It's got the film of the Southern Cross and how he put the two planes together, because there's always been a bit of a story. The Southern Cross is a composite plane of one Fokker and the other. Not true. He took the plane off, he took the wing off one, put it on that one, flew it, crashed it, took it back off. And the other half of the Southern Cross, the other fuselage of the single one, is up in Ben Olsen's home, North Dakota. I think I've been there. I can't remember. It was bloody cold. North or South Dakota, but there's film of that all there. And there's another one of the first flight in Antarctica of Wilkins in 1928. And he filmed that as well. And that's some of the stuff I found in things. So anyway, I'll just jump in there and say there is a Jeff Maynard YouTube channel if you want to look at some of those ones. Forget all the shipwreck stuff. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
So you've introduced us to a boy's own story. It's a fabulous life that he's lived, and you could say even each 1/3 of it, just his World War I escapades are wonderful, and his flights and his submarine. Has the ABC or anyone ever shown interest in creating a film of his life?
No, a few people have approached myself, and it's sort of thinking, you know, there's a movie in this guy. Certainly a documentary, or you know,
at least that
something, because there's so many photographs and there's so much film. There is hours of film, literally hours.
But
of film.
it's a story, like,
and it's a story.
Yeah.
No. A lot of people actually, when you talk to people who want to dramatize a film, and I've had a few talks with you know, producers, directors who sort of say, you know, they sort of say, well, the problem with him is, and most Australians are sort of, or people that are famous for one thing, you know. Donald Bradman could swing a cricket bat, you know. There you go. Monash, 6 months at the Western Front organising the battles, that was his thing. Take that out and we wouldn't name freeways after him, you know. Drunk or sober, Kingsford Smith could fly an aeroplane, you know. But Wilkins did all these different things across such a thing. No one's been able to get a handle on him. No one say, what's his story arc, as they say.
But that's what I mean. You've virtually got different chapters of
You've got so many chapters,
a fantastic, unbelievable life in reality.
Exactly, yeah. But
and he's an Australian to boot.
Yes, yes. But and no one's really able to figure out or say, well, how do we approach it, you know? So yeah, it would be good. And there's been chats, but no one's figured out a way to do it. Sorry, I think, oh, sir, yep.
Yeah, behind you.
Over there.
It's been most enjoyable, but it's playing terrible things with my memory. The volume of the Australian official history containing the photographs with his annotations.
Yeah.
I recall being at a history conference somewhere, and I can't recall when, where that was discussed. And the point at the history conference was having the evidence of his annotations saying, this is mine, revised completely the thinking of the people as to, they all thought the photographs were Hurley's.
That's been a problem. Very briefly, as I said, Wilkins and Hurley both turned up at the West. They were good mates. They both turned up at the Western Front the same day, August 17, 1917. They went across on the same boat, got off at, I think, Calais or somewhere, met Bean. It was the third IPS, which was a step-by-step battles that Haig was progressing through different places. They both photographed that, and then they settled down for the winter by November. The muds came, and they said, we don't fight until next March type thing. So Hurley then went off to Palestine, never went back to the Western Front. But in that period, they were both there, which was quite a significant period. Hurley put his name on Wilkins' photographs. In fact, in Bean's diary, he actually writes, Hurley's putting his name on all the photographs, even the ones that are taken by Wilkins.
So it's actually documented by Bean.
Oh yeah, Bean as well. But Hurley, people think Hurley and Bean had a falling out because Hurley wanted to make these sort of doctorate photos with 2 or 3 images together. They actually had a falling out because Hurley said, "These are my photographs. I own them." Hurley was never actually part of the Australian AIF. He wore the uniform of a captain, so as they did, walk around honorary captain, so people stop you all the time, say, "What are you doing here?" He wore he never actually enlisted. So he said, "These are my photographs. I can take them back to Australia when I wish." Bean said, "No, these belong to the people of Australia." Hurley resigned in a huff, and you can't resign from the army if you don't like things. Hurley resigned in a huff, came back to Australia, and wrote a lot of bad things in his diary, and then tore the pages out. So we don't know what he wrote. But yeah, they had a falling out over who owned them. But Hurley said, they're my photographs. Even if Wilkins, Hurley was a captain, honorary captain. Wilkins was a second lieutenant when they turned up. So Hurley said, "I'm in charge. Even though you might be pressing the thing, they're my photographs." So there's confusion, but that's where that book's interesting. Wilkins has said, I took this one.
Just finally, when did that book and its annotations come to light? Around what date?
2014.
Thank you very much.
I found that was my trip to America, the Amish barn that Mike Ross, the stepson of Winston Ross, loaded up the trunk or boot of his car and took it back to Michigan. Yeah, he had it all there and he stuck it in the neighbour's barn. I found that. I brought that, wrapped it up in a T-shirt and brought it back.
Derek, if we can move perhaps a few questions from our Zoom members we can't see, but I'm sure there's 1 or 2 Zoom members who would be keen to ask Jeff a question or two.
I'm unmuted.
Go ahead, Roderick. We can hear you.
All right, thanks. Look, that was fascinating, and from much more than just the aviation content. I'm a trained librarian and archivist, and just the whole archival worries and the unscrambling and the efforts, that was fascinating too.
Thank you.
A fascinating subject, and Jeff has been an excellent speaker and also excellent illustrations as well. And it's a real mystery as to where all the bits and pieces are around the world, and people who have no connection with our subject want to retain them, whether it's from monetary or value or what they're going to turn up in another 10 or 20 years, who knows, on eBay or something similar. But I, for one, have been fascinated by our display tonight. And Jeff has a couple of books here, of course, as he mentioned to you earlier on. And I say thank you very much, Jeff, for your talk tonight. I appreciate it. Strong speaker. Excellent.
Strong speaker.
Thank
you.